This is Atheist History Week, and I'm John Rafferty, president of the Secular Humanist Society of New York, and also a proud and active member of New York City Atheists, which produces this show. Each week at this time, we discuss significant events in this week in history, significant events in terms of atheism, agnosticism, rationalism, skepticism, humanism, secularism, what have you-ism, all to do with free thinking, okay? We discuss notable people, some famous ones, some not so famous, even some infamous ones, who've had something to do during this week in history, whether they were born or died or achieved something notable. We discuss publishing events, the premieres of plays or operas that have free thought ideas in them, and of course we discuss notable religious fun and games like pogroms and burnings at the stake and other faith-based initiatives. Here we are at the beginning of December, so let's consider the first week in December, and we start off with December 1st, the birthday of one of America's best known atheists. He calls himself an agnostic with one foot in atheism. I think he's an atheist. Woody Allen. Woody Allen was born on December 1st in 1935 in Brooklyn. Born Alan Stewart Koenigsberg. But when he started writing gags for the newspaper columns while he was still in high school, and eventually started getting television gigs, he started using the nom de plume Woody Allen. He said of his upbringing, though, he said, "I am a Jew only in the sense that I was born into a Jewish family. I have no interest in the organized religions beyond a certain cerebral historical curiosity. They are all nonsense to me in their basic premises. I'm agnostic, but I have one foot in atheism," which I mentioned a little while ago. Woody Allen, I'm not going to go through the list of all his movies, but they are many, including Best Picture of the Year, Annie Hall, and a lot of others, and I'm a big Woody Allen movie fan. One of my favorite of his lines of his is a little bit sympathetic towards religion. He said in an interview with Rolling Stone in 1987, he said, "I do occasionally envy the person who is religious naturally, without being brainwashed into it or suckered into it by all the organized hustles." And also the last line, or just about the last line, it's in the final monologue in his great movie, Love and Death. "To you, I'm an atheist. To God, I'm the loyal opposition." And speaking of God, and the fact that God is invisible and does not make himself known to us, he said, "If only God would give me some clear sign, like making a large deposit in my name in a Swiss bank." Not only is there no God, but try getting a plumber on weekends. And about immortality, he said, "I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying." Terrific Woody Allen, who has given us a lot of fun and a lot of laughs over the years. And as the novelist Salman Rushdie once said, "If Woody Allen were a Muslim, he'd be dead by now." Okay. Also, another contemporary born on December 2nd in 1950 is the folk singer and songwriter Kristen Lems. She was born into a musical family and was a brilliant young woman, student, Fulbright scholar, but a singer and songwriter, basically, and the voice, pretty much, of the feminist movement especially around the time of the campaign for the Equal Rights Amendment, which, as we all know, failed. But as Gloria Steinem said of Kristen Lenz and her lyrics, she said, she's proof, Kristen Lenz and her lyrics are a one-woman argument against the notion that the women's movement doesn't have a sense of humor. For illustration of that, consider the first verse and chorus of her song, Days of Theocracy. First they fight abortion, birth control is next, then comes sex if you're not married, finally out goes sex. Put the prayers back in the schools, install parochiade, allow for corporal punishment, and then you got it made. The chorus, we're going back, back, back to the good old days when men were really men and women knew their place. Back, back a couple of centuries and welcome back the days of the theocracy. A little more? Let's do a little more. The family is so holy, there must be no divorce, and if a wife is not content, she must adjust, of course. And if he's forced to beat her, it's all for her own good. She must know what her limits are, as any woman should. The next to go is daycare. It's all a commie plot. What could be more fulfilling than a child, wanted or not? The woman's work is housework. God wanted it that way. A salaried job degrades her, since she never works for pay. They teach us woman's lot is love, honor, and obey, and while their crusty notions seems like jokes to us today, they're sitting in the Capitol. They're voting on our lives. If we don't stop them soon, our freedom will not long survive. We're going back, back, back to the bad old days when men were really masters and women were their slaves. Let's go ahead for future centuries and build a world that's based on true democracy and build a world that's based on true equality. Days of Theocracy, written and sung by Kristen Lenz, born December 2nd in 1950. Going back a couple of centuries, in 1795, the historian Thomas Carlyle, the British historian Thomas Carlyle, was born on December 4th. He was born into a pious Calvinist family and was, as they said in those days, intended for the church. He studied for 5 years to become a minister of the Church of Scotland, but along the way in his reading he came across Edward Gibbon of The Decline and Fall of Rome, and reading Gibbon and particularly about the early history of the church, which was part of the decline and fall of Rome, he turned against Christianity, which scandalized his family. But nevertheless, he continued his studies and he became a teacher. He helped introduce much of German philosophy to Great Britain and to its educational system. And he worked as an historian, but not an anti-Christian, but a non-Christian historian. Of course, his most famous book was on the French Revolution, and it was simply called French Revolution. And it is the subject of one of those weird little anecdotes in history. When he finished the first draft of this pile of paper, this big, on the French Revolution, he left it lying around, and the maid, needing to start fires in a fireplace, needed paper. She burned up his entire manuscript, and he had to start all over again, which he did, and he finished it, and it was one of the most important books of the early 18th century. And it's still used as a resource even today. He was not an atheist. He was more pantheist or a deist, but a big fan of Voltaire, of whom he said that Voltaire gave the death stab to modern superstition, that horrid incubus which dwelt in darkness, shunning the light, is passing away. Voltaire's was a most weighty service. For himself, he said, Carlyle said, I have for many years strictly avoided going to church or having anything to do with mumbo-jumbo. We know nothing. All is and must be utterly incomprehensible. I suppose that's a philosophy we could expect from someone who had his life's work burned up by the maid. But at any rate, Thomas Carlyle. Jumping ahead quite a few decades, we come to December 3rd in 1857 and the birth of Joseph Conrad, the novelist, in Russian-occupied Poland. And I'm going to attempt to tell you his Polish name, Theodor Joseph Konrad Korzeniowski, I think, at any rate. Became one, although English was not his native language, so to speak, or his birth language, became one of the best novelists the English language has ever seen. After his parents died, both of lung diseases, while he was still a kid, he went to live with an uncle and then joined the Merchant Navy when he was 17 and went to see the world. And those adventures became the basis of most of his works. Some of the best novels ever in the English language, like Lord Jim and The Secret Agent, and of course The Heart of Darkness, which became the basis for one of the biggest films of all time, Apocalypse Now. Conrad was not a flag-waving, parade-leading atheist, but he wrote in some reminiscences late in his life in 1912, he wrote, "The ethical view of the universe involves us at last in so many cruel and absurd contradictions that I have come to suspect that the aim of creation cannot be ethical at all." Kind of gray outlook on life. And only slightly less gray is the quote, "Prayers are to men as dolls are to children. They are not without use and comfort, but it's not easy to take them very seriously." That is by Samuel Butler. Not the novelist Samuel Butler, not to be confused with the 17th century poet Samuel Butler. Our Samuel Butler, the novelist, was born on December 4th in 1835, roughly a contemporary of Joseph Conrad's. Again, like so many other people that we've discussed here over these past few months, in England in the 19th century or the 18th century, these young men were expected to go into the ministry. Intellectuals, it would assume, would go into the ministry. They were usually from reasonably comfortable middle-class families, and so they had the choice of what to do. They didn't have to worry about whether they get a job in the mines. So many of them come out of the ministry once they get their education and find out, well, I've learned to question everything else. Now I'll question the big guy in the sky with a beard. And it turns out they don't believe in them anymore. And novelist Samuel Butler, who produced a number of novels and had to run away from the family that he grew up with because they were so scandalized by his rejection of the church. He went to live in New Zealand, where he also read Gibbon's Decline and Fall, and he went into sheep breeding in New Zealand and read Darwin, which makes a lot of sense. If you're breeding sheep and you read Darwin, and he corresponded with Darwin, and then he returned to England, to London, and resumed a writing career, and did some great work. But it was his novel, The Way of All Flesh, which was published posthumously, which really cemented his reputation. If it hadn't been for The Way of All Flesh, we probably wouldn't be talking about Samuel Butler today, and neither would a lot of other people. We deal with a lot of birthdays here, but December 5th is a date where we've got a couple of religious fun and games. We spoke before, or I spoke before, of the Equal Rights Amendment of 25 years ago, is it now? That did not pass. But one of the most vocal supporters of the Equal Rights Amendment was Sonia Johnson. And Sonia Johnson was a born Mormon, grew up in the Church of Latter-day Saints, and she worked hard for the Equal Rights Amendment. She was on the lecture circuit. She palled around with all the other big names who were working for it. And so the Church of Latter-day Saints, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, excommunicated her on December 5th in 1979 for supporting the Equal Rights Amendment. Any church that gets enough power will do the same thing, won't it? And if you don't think the Mormon Church has as much power in Utah as the Catholic Church used to have in Italy, you haven't been paying attention. Excommunicated Sonia Johnson. Any rate, back even further ago, over 500 years ago, Pope Innocent VIII, on December 5th in 1484, issued a papal bull. Bull Summis Desiderantes, the witches' bull. Pope Innocent, I don't know much about him, but I assume that he had his head screwed on backwards. He obviously believed that there was a real problem with witches in Europe in the late 15th century. And so this bull authorized witch hunts, literally told clerics and civil authorities throughout Europe, go look for witches, find them, and burn them at the stake. Historians estimate the lowest estimate of the number of people put to death as witches over the next 250 years. The lowest estimate is 900,000. 600,000, excuse me, I got my numbers transposed, is 600,000. And the high estimate, 9 million. Now, the lowest estimate would probably be based on official records, but how many little old ladies in out-of-the-way villages were thrown down wells or just simply beaten to death and never made it into the records? Probably 9 million is closer to the fact. Any rate. One of our leading contemporary scholars is Noam Chomsky, who was born on December 7th in 1928, the son of a Hebrew scholar. And Chomsky absolutely revolutionized the world of linguistics, and even many intellectuals before Chomsky started writing didn't even know what linguistics was. Nevertheless, though his academic field is linguistics, he's been very, very involved all his life in left-wing politics. He's been blacklisted. He's been thrown in jail. He's been threatened with death He has his books have been withdrawn by his own publisher for their, frankly, anti-Americanism. Chomsky has been critical of practically all of American foreign policy for as long as he's been around. I don't agree with a lot of what he said. That isn't the point. Chomsky said it, and he's a free thinker. He goes his own way, does his own thing, and to have his publisher literally destroy the books that he published is pretty weird. At any rate, he's still very much with us, still very much fighting his own war on the left. I'm a child of the Enlightenment. He said in an interview in 1992, I think irrational belief is a dangerous phenomenon, and I try to consciously avoid irrational belief. Me too. A couple of other people. December 7th in 1888, a newspaper man who was quite a figure in those days when newspaper men had the same sort of romantic cachet that, well, romantic or whatever you want to call it, they were media darlings the way television anchors are today. Haywood Broun. Spelled B-R-O-U-N, Haywood Broun, was born in Brooklyn in 1888 on December 7th. Went to Harvard, where he befriended Walter Lippmann and John Reed, who would eventually write 10 Days That Shook the World. He left Harvard 10 credits short of a degree. Why? He had a chance to become a sports writer for the New York Morning Telegraph, and he grabbed it with the Telegraph and then with the Tribune, and he went to World War I as a correspondent. He was a media star of his time, and also one of the roundtable at the Algonquin with Dorothy Parker and Robert Benchley and all the rest of them. He worked for the New York World, which is a big-time paper at the time, and a liberal one, but he quit the paper when they refused to run his feature stories on the Sacco-Vanzetti trial, and the subsequent worldwide outrage about the conviction and impending execution of Sacco and Vanzetti, and so he quit the paper. He ran for Congress as a socialist. He was a fierce defender of the Scottsboro Boys, the Scottsboro Nines, who were young African Americans who were accused of rape and completely unjustly by a white woman who was a sort of freelance hooker, and in order not to get arrested again for prostitution, she said, those black guys, they raped me. They almost all got hanged, but the public outcry was such that it finally turned around. But it was a huge case in the early 30s. He wrote for The Nation and The New Republic, and he was basically a pretty good free thinker and a major force on the left in American politics, who said that only Puritans think of the devil as the most fascinating figure in the universe. Interesting when you think about it. That's so much of the fascination of the extreme religion is really fascination with evil, isn't it? I think in many cases they're looking into the depths of their own psyches and seeing what horrors there are there. Horrors that Joseph Conrad would have understood. I hope I see you, I hope you actually see me next week at this time. I'm John Rafferty. Thank you for watching.
Wherever we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation, at least not just. We are also a Jewish nation, a Muslim nation, and a Buddhist nation, and a Hindu nation, and a nation of non-believers.